Chucky 2009. It's raining today, and also I'm here with my buddy Steven, and we're going to be doing some dual shield flux core welding.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I guess we're going to be doing some flat horizontal position. We'll do a little bit of vertical, some overhead, talk about machine setup. We're really lucky. Steven here is from the Georgia Trade School, and I understand this is something you guys teach.
Yeah, very extensively in all positions.
Yeah. So you've done it a little bit before then. Yeah,
I used to do pressure vessel work for a place called Trinity Rail, and so we welded pressure pipe up to 200 pounds with 1/16 flux, and it's dual shield, of course. So yeah, I've had a fair share of it.
That's excellent. Yeah. So really hope you guys like having Steven here on the channel, sharing his expertise here. So basically, dual shield, from what I know about this, it's a pretty high intensity welding process. It's very commonly used on large things like railroad cars, for instance, structural steel, large industrial weldments, agricultural equipment, big, heavy stuff that requires a lot of metal to be put down very quickly. Would you agree with that overall?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we got that, and also I think you're saying this is a little different than just like running your regular, single shield flux core with turning on the gas. This is, I think you probably agree, this is a totally different animal here.
Yes, completely different. Not as much spatter as single shield. Doesn't run as hot as single shield. Not as dirty as single shield. So the benefit of having the gas is it's much more aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah,
so.
And it's maybe a little more operator friendly.
Absolutely.
Alright, so today we're going to be running this with the mighty HTP MiG 2400. This is a 240 amp wire feed machine. It's a very high quality unit. It's imported from Europe, made in Hungary. HTP sells it here in the US, and I've had this particular machine for several years, and I've put a lot of hours on it, and it has held up exceptionally well. It's got a buttery smooth arc, dual wire feed drive setup, so you get a nice smooth feed with it, 24 voltage taps, and like I said, 240 amps, and so it's a pretty sizable machine. Most of the self-shielded wires that I've at least seen generally run on electrode negative. So this is electrode positive, like you'd run a 7018 on, like you'd run short circuit MiG on. And we're using some 75-25 gas. Do you think that'll work out okay for us?
Yeah, so you're gonna have a lot of old school guys say 100% CO2 on everything structural. You're even gonna have guys that say 100% CO2 on everything MiG. 100% CO2 has its place, but 75-25 is that even balance of penetration and a nice aesthetic looking weld. So, I favor 75-25 always, but then, 100% carbon dioxide has its place. But.
So what kind of flow rate are we going to be pushing through this with the dual shield here? I know I'm told it's a little higher than with MiG.
Yeah, typically I run about 35 to 40. I mean, have I run a flow rate of 25 or on the lower end 20? Yeah, but something like this, that diffuser and that nozzle that's pushing that gas out, once you get over 45, you're going to blow that gas away. So around 30 to 40, I would say.
All right, so to paraphrase, decently sized MiG machine with a decent duty cycle, electrode positive, 75-25 gas at about a flow rate of 35-40-ish to get started. And I think we're ready to go. So we're going to start off welding some half-inch plate with this. So again, it's a fairly serious process. And anything else you have to add here?
No, not really.
All right, cool. I'm really excited to see this, so let's do it. Cool.
Alright, so a couple things to note when you're running, whether it's flat, vertical, or overhead, or horizontal. You want to pay attention to what the puddle's doing and what the wire's doing. If it's taking you a really long time to build that puddle up, even if it's just 035 flux core, what we're running right now, which typical flux is 045. If it's taking you a really long time to build that puddle up, you might want to turn your volts up, burn the wire off a little faster. If it's punching against the plate, and it just seems like it's not grounding right, that's usually your volts. If the wire is burning off too far towards the nozzle and kind of dripping, you want to turn that wire speed up, which is going to bring that wire out faster. And I know that's a lot, and that can be overwhelming, but essentially what I'm saying is, just like on any of Chucky's videos he talks about, just pay attention to what you're doing. You don't just have your amperage like with stick. You've got wire feed speed and you've got voltage. So you need to pay attention to those, and we're going to go into those later in the video. about what it looks like and what a good weld looks like with wire and what a bad weld looks like with wire. All right, so let's talk about this real quick. So if you'll notice, we can get a close-up of these welds real quick. You'll notice the real difference between the first weld and the second weld. Okay, so what I've got in the background here is a completely fused weld, right? Penetrated both toes into the top and the bottom of the fillet joint. And then what I've got here is a weld that isn't necessarily have bad shielding, but it has bad settings. So this weld was completely shielded from the nitrogen in the atmosphere, but what happened is the voltage is so low that it can't burn that wire off enough. You still have your pressure from the wire feed speed, but you don't have that burning element that the voltage gives you, and that's why this weld is laying on top of the plate. And to be honest with you, you put welds like that on structural steel, you know, it's only a matter of time until those things break and whatever you've worked on becomes completely unfused. So that's what it looks like when your volts are really, really low. Again, it doesn't burn the wire off fast enough, and it will not penetrate into your weld. So now we're going to show you what it looks like if your volts are correct, but your wire feed speed is too low. All right. Now, this is what happens when your weld doesn't have the appropriate amount of wire feed speed. Now, if you'll notice, I know it's kind of difficult to see, but we have this weld in the background. That's our appropriate size weld, around 3/16 of an inch. Okay. Then we have a weld with too low a voltage. Now we have a weld here with the correct amount of voltage, but too low of wire speed. So I know you can't see this, and hopefully we'll get an action shot of this later in the video, is the wire globs up, and I don't know if the camera can get that ball on the end. What happens is your wire isn't coming out fast enough. So this wire is rated with the gas flow and the correct settings, it's rated to burn off around the same amount of distance from the plate that the wire is thick. So you want this wire burning off at 35 thousandths of an inch away from the plate. Now what happened was, you couldn't see it when I was welding, but the wire is not burning off till almost close up to the tip. Now that's dangerous for a couple of reasons. Not necessarily safety dangerous, but efficiency dangerous in the sense that it'll damage your tip. You'll have to stop, you'll have to undo everything. Hopefully it won't bird's nest. You'll have to replace your tip. Also, if you notice, the amount of time it took me to travel from the beginning of my weld to the end of the weld, and the actual weld size is, that's also not good from an efficiency standpoint. So you want to be able to travel fast, penetrate fast, and get cooking, because that's what this welding was created. This is a wire form of a 70-18 stick electrode, essentially. You want to be able to put surfacing welds in, put structural welds in at a high deposition rate, and you don't want it to take a long time. So again, what you see here is the product of my weld is about the size of a 1/8 60 or a 1/8 70-18 weld, and it took me about the exact same time about that. So you just don't want it to take that long. So just to recap, we have low voltage here and correct wire feed speed, which the low voltage allows our weld to not penetrate into the base metal, and which causes lack of fusion. And then we have correct voltage and a low wire feed speed, which takes a much longer weld, takes more time, and it can damage your tip and also the other components that are inside the nozzle and the diffuser. You have two different types of porosity. You have actual porosity in the weld, which is caused by, a number of different things. Dirty material, your flow rate's not set correctly on your flow meter, incorrect shielding gas, and things of that nature. Then you have what's called surface porosity, which a lot of times can happen from your diffuser is on the fritz, your gun angle, your flow rate is too high. So there's two sides of the spectrum as far as porosity is concerned. You want to pay attention to what you're doing with your nozzle. So for instance, everybody knows that the diffuser on a standard wire feed gun the way that the diffuser comes out, and I can't take it off right now, but if you can imagine, there's a piece of equipment down in here that allows the gas to come out at 35 psi, and then this nozzle, what it does is it allows the gas to come out in a conical shape. And so what that's doing is it's coming down over your weld and shielding that weld from the nitrogen in the atmosphere. So if you take that gun and you pull it away too far, or there's a big gust of wind, you're not going to shield that metal anymore. Similarly, if you take that nozzle and you've got it in a really, really, really tight spot and you're just a little too far away, it's going to do the same thing. Or if your flow rate is too high and you bury the nozzle too close to the metal, you can blow that gas away. So there's a couple things that can cause wagon tracks, wormholes. Those are all surface porosity things that can be tweaked just by paying attention to what you're doing, looking at your machine and your equipment, and diagnosing that. And then as far as actual structural porosity goes, that usually has a lot to do if you are completely on the end side of a tank and you're running out of gas, or your metal is just extremely filthy. And we're not talking about rusty. I'm talking about it's got concrete, it's got dirt, it's got mold. I mean, I'm talking you're not able to actually get to the metal and really start that arc smoothly. And then a couple other things I wanted to talk about is your gun angle. So you're going to hear a lot of guys tell you push, pull, drag, up, down, whatever, it doesn't matter. And in some cases, you're not going to have the choice whether you can push or pull. You're just going to have to do what you can do. But I will tell you that the best way to run flux is at a slight 15-degree drag. So if you'll see, as I run, I'm always kind of dragging and pushing with my fingers. This is not pushing, this is dragging. Pushing is when you take the gun and the puddle is jumping in front of your arc. That's pushing the weld. So that's what you don't want to do. You do not want to push the weld. You want to drag the weld and have the puddle be behind the arc. So what happens is if you push the weld, sometimes if you push it, not all the time, you can trap slag. So if you're pushing the weld and that puddle is jumping in front of your arc, what's happening is that puddle's spurting over, and then your arc's coming over it after that puddle is hardened, and that's how you trap slag. So just to recap, you always want to drag, keep the puddle behind you and the arc in front. When you push and change your gun angle, just that opposite 15 degrees, that puddle's going to jump in front of your arc, harden, and you can now bring that molten metal over an area that already has flux in it, trap slag, and everybody knows trap slag is a recipe for a cracked weld or lack of fusion, and you know, you're not going to pass an x-ray test, you're not going to pass a structural test that way. So,
all right. Yeah, that's excellent. Thanks for that. I know one thing that a lot of people who are newer to dual shield might deal with are the wagon tracks or the surface porosity. If somebody's got that going on, what would you recommend they change or they adjust?
So typically if my students have surface porosity, wagon tracks, wormholes, things like that, the first thing I'll do is I'll look at their flow rate, I'll check the gas out, I'll check to see if their voltage and their wire feed settings are correct. But more or less it's usually just an adjustment in gun angle, it's just an adjustment in checking your gas or an adjustment in checking your voltage. So those three variables really can cut that down. Also too, the biggest one that I run into for novice welders is really their stick out is just too far away. Okay. So they're just getting a little bit of porosity from the shielding gas not completely covering it.
So can you talk a little bit about the voltage causing the wagon tracks in there? You turn the voltage up or down if someone's having an issue like this?
Yeah, so if somebody's volts aren't burning the wire off fast enough, you know, you've got to think for flux core, there's a flux inside of the core of this wire. So as Chucky said, the volts affecting that is you got to think about it as if your volts are low, you're not burning that wire off all the way, and that flux is not being able to get distributed evenly. Similarly, just like the gas. But specifically to the voltages, if you don't burn that wire off hot enough, you're not going to get the full shielding properties from the flux that's inside the wire. So if I've got surface porosity and I've checked all of my settings except for the volts, if I've checked the flow meter, my stick out, my gun angle, what I'll do is I'll crank that heat up on the volts and I'll have that wire get burned off really hot, and 9 times out of 10 that fixes the problem right there.
Excellent. So, all right, well yeah, thanks for that. You want to show us how to do this properly now?
Yes sir.
All right, thank you. so I understand we got a horizontal position fillet weld set up here. Can you maybe show us exactly how you're going to position yourself in the gun to do this?
Yeah, so I'm just going to put my left arm up here because I'm right-handed, and I'm going to hold the gun with my right hand. But if you're left-handed, it's going to be the reverse. You're going to prop your elbow up, and you're going to hold the gun with your left hand, which is your dominant hand. And what I'm going to look for is I'm just going to look for a straight in and then tilt to about 15 degrees. Again, I'm going to go straight in, let my wire be directly in the joint, and then I'm going to roll my nozzle and lift it up off the plate. Make sure that I can travel the whole distance of the joint and pretty much look for a weld that's going to go about 3/16 of an inch up on the top plate and 3/16 of an inch out to have a 3/16 overall fillet weld. So again, the appropriate angle and wire electrode placement, I'll stick that out a little bit, is you want the wire directly in the joint. So not on top, oops, not on bottom, you want it directly in the middle of the joint right there. So a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll weld it up high and it'll roll over, or they'll weld it too low and it won't roll up. So straight in, roll my nozzle a little bit directly in the joint, and then travel at a nice rate all the way throughout. Alright, so a couple things I want to talk about as I chip the slag off. Now again, I'm focusing on my settings. If my settings are correct, I shouldn't really have to beat the slag off of there. So I'm going to take my chipping hammer and the broadside, and I'm going to scrape my BBs off. And everybody here knows that when you go and weld test or interview for a place, you know, presentation is everything. So after you chip your slag off, you know, wire wheel, clean everything up, wire brush. You know, obviously you want to take the time to get all those BBs off. I'm not too worried about it right now. What we're looking for here on this weld is I'm looking for complete fusion on the top and the bottom side. And if I had a flashlight, I'd show you that there's one spot where I went a little too slow, and you can see right here. It's still fused correctly and it's still fused perfectly. What you're looking for here as we shine this flashlight is you're looking for complete fusion on the top and on the bottom, a nice even weld. Yeah, can finish the whole joint. I could have gone a little more there and went back into my puddle. I got a crater there, but essentially in the weld affected area you want to look for complete fusion on the top and on the bottom. And I'm going to show you how to put your next pass if you were to put 3 passes in this joint. The next pass that I'm going to do, if this broadhead represents my wire electrode, just like how my first one went into the center of the joint, I'm going to put my next one right at the toe, and then my third one is going to go right at the top of this toe. It's going to give even dispersion. Put one in the center, one in the bottom, one at the top. So I'll show you guys how I do that right quick.
Alright, that sounds awesome. So you're saying if someone wants to fill this whole thing out with weld metal, it's pretty much just the same stacking routine as what we're doing with the 3-pass weld here. Would you agree with that, basically?
Yeah, pretty much. Chip my slag on my second weld, kind of same thing again, wire brush, clean it up, wire brush, clean it up, and I'm going to look again for nice even penetration. Now I'm ready to stack my third weld on the top to complete the weldment of this joint. Alright, so now that I've put my 3 passes in on this 1F fillet joint, again, what I'm looking for is I'm looking for an even distribution of these welds, you know, and obviously there's, you know, minor defects in it, but overall we're not looking for pretty, we're looking for efficient and aesthetically pleasing. So don't get hung up on what it looks like as long as it's serving its purpose. So as I take this file, I'll point these things out to you. I'm looking at, when I'm finished, the center of my 2 welds line up with what would look like the center of this joint. So my first weld goes directly down the center, and then my second one ties into the toe of that weld, and then the third one ties into the toe of that same weld on the top. I know that can all be confusing, but hopefully from the video you can see how first one goes in the center, second one on the bottom, third one on top, and you would just continue to repeat that process with the exception of the initial first pass. So if I were to make this another 3 passes, I would put my first weld here, then I would stack it here, then I would stack another one here, and then I would come back to the bottom and so forth. And obviously the more and more welds you put in, the larger the step count, you know, up to 5 and 6 and 7 welds. But this is essentially what you're looking for a standard weldment of a 1/2-inch piece of steel on flux core.
All right, awesome. Yeah, so hey, thanks for showing us that. And you want to do some, I guess maybe some vertical here next?
Yes, sir.
All right, let's do it.